A pleasant good morning to you all. Welcome to Friend Talk with me, Yvonne. A pleasant morning to you all. Zimbabwe, welcome to Zimbabwe Daily. This is Frank Talk with Yvonne, a program we are bringing in collaboration with the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe. Joining me in the studio, I have 5 panelists whom I'm going to allow to introduce themselves, and we'll begin this conversation as we are looking at the state of our education sector, what went wrong and what needs to be done. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourselves. So if you see yourself on the screen, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Tim Middleton. I am the Executive Director of the Association of Trust Schools, but really representing many of the numerous independent schools and colleges in Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Tim. Welcome.
Morning, everyone. I'm Obert Masaraure, the National President of Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Coltart.
Good morning, everybody. I'm David Coltart. I'm a lawyer. I was in physical education and I still have an education hat in that I'm chairman of school at Coltart College.
All right, thank you, Senator Coltart. Mr. Masengwe.
How are you, everyone? I'm Zingai Masengwe. I'm a teacher at Siakobu, Kariba Rural. I'm also the chairperson of Kariba Rural. I'm glad to share something that I've got experience in Kariba Rural as a teacher.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Zingai. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tafadzwa A Ndoro, and I'm a student activist.
All right, welcome, Tafadzwa. Welcome, everybody. So this discussion is basically emanating from what we saw coming out in our public examinations just recently, and even as we are looking forward to receiving the O-level results. I'm getting a little bit of noise. Allow me to mute everyone. Okay, as we are waiting to get the O-levels and the A-level results, it's not looking good, but all the same, we cannot stop having a conversation that helps our society to grow and that helps us to get the nation to the levels that we want it to function. Now, I'm going to allow the president of ARTUZ, Mr. Obert Masaraure, to come in and give us the direction that this conversation is going to take. Mr. Masaraure, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I think we are meeting at a time where the nation is in shock and in panic because of the quality of our grade 7 results, which is really unacceptable. But our results have been dropping, the pass rates have been dropping over the years. In 2019, the pass rate dropped by 5%, and then this year it dropped to almost 9%. And we know in 2021, the 2021 pass rate is likely going to be worse for grade 7. Why? Because these are the learners who are going to be sitting for the new curriculum, which also includes ICT, mass displays, among other new learning areas. For learners in rural schools, we expect them to perform badly, particularly the ICT, because there's no electricity, there's no internet connectivity, they don't have access to the resources. But we are discussing today not as a reactionary grouping. We are not only reacting to the quality of these results, but we also want to come up with long-term solutions, which we believe are going to be captured into what we call an education charter which will table before policymakers and to lobby them advocate for its adoption to rescue our sector from collapse. So this discussion is part of our education campaign, where we are bringing in different voices and ideas together and consolidating them into a document which is going to be the education charter. So now in this particular discussion, we are glad that we have a former education minister, Senator David Coltart, who obviously would give us some his own ideas on the policy direction we should adopt as a nation if we are going to rescue our education sector. We also have Team Middleton representing the the trust schools. The trust schools have been performing well. Our public schools are collapsing. Then the inequality gap is increasing. So we want to learn from whatever success stories they have registered, and also appreciate their challenges. Then obviously we would try to copy and get those ideas for our public schools, and then we can lobby our government to try to adopt some of the strategies that they've been implementing. Of course, we also have Tafadzwa here. Obviously, she will try to guide us with your own experience with the Zimbabwe education system. But last but not least, we also have Comrade Zingai, who is a teacher in a rural school. We also want to hear his lived experiences, what he is going through, and also his recommendations from the classroom. As Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, we fight for proper education. We fight, of course, we push for labor justice for the teachers, because we know when teachers are motivated, they will deliver more in our classrooms. So I will give it back to you, Yvonne. I'm not going to present much today. I'm just trying to. I also be learning from these experts who are on this platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Masaraure, for giving us that brief overview of what we intend to do here today. And yes, you've clearly highlighted that our independent or private schools are doing much better than our government schools. Now, I want to come to Tafadzwa. Tafadzwa, I hope you can hear me very well. Can you give us an appreciation of how our education sector has or is from a perspective of a student? Over to you, Tafadzwa. Tafadzwa, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Can you come again? I couldn't hear you.
Okay, I want you to give us an understanding or an appreciation from the perspective of the students of how the education sector is and has been performing.
Sorry, can you come again?
All right. I think we are having a little bit of a connection problem with you, Tafadzwa. If possible, can you try to reconnect so that we can also get your perspective?
Or can you please type your question, then I'll respond.
Okay, good. I'll do that. In the meantime, I'm going to come to Mr. Zingai Masengwe. You are a teacher in the rural areas. Can you give us an overview of how the teachers and the students are in the rural areas in terms of our education system?
I'm a teacher at the Kariba, one of the worst rural areas in Zimbabwe, where us as teachers in a situation that is pathetic. We are working under a situation in which we are not able to access internet. Most of our students travel long distance to reach where the schools are. Most of the students used to cross rivers. Some of the rivers that are big rivers, like Wume River, that is pouring water into Zambezi, into Lake Kariba. So what I'm trying to say is, I would like to highlight some of the situations, some of the challenges. For example, as a teacher, I noticed some of the situation in which exams are run. Exams, the the exams in which the exams were being run are not good at all, because most of the teachers, some who attend invigilation, some did not. I didn't know and didn't understand. But generally, the situation that we are facing as teachers is not good, because we tend most of the time as teachers also to travel from long distance, like the exams were hurriedly done, because if we look on the distance that most of the teachers travel, like I came from Chibi Masvingo, where I managed to ride almost 7 buses, and most of the time I get reach into my working area at 11 to 2 a.m. morning, meaning to say to work in a situation that I'm comfortable is able to help us to provide internet, transport, and even our infrastructure is not good at all. I think I can end here.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Zinkai. You highlighted the issue of lack of access to internet, the distance between home and school that the students have to travel, and also the welfare of the teachers themselves in the rural areas. I'm going to come to you, Tim. Give us an overview of the trust schools. How have you been operating, and why is it that you're thriving at such a time when everything else seems to be going downhill?
For that, I think there are a number of factors, obviously, and probably the reverse of what we have just heard from the previous speaker. There, for the most part, although there is a great variety in the trust schools in terms of it's not just all very high fee-paying ones, but many other schools, they what we've found is that actually, while there has not been necessarily, many places don't have internet access similarly, but what we have aimed for, rather than purely online learning during this COVID crisis, there has been much more what I call off-campus ongoing learning. So for some of it, it has been online, but again, many parents have struggled to get Wi-Fi if they've got 2 or 3 children. Right. Different. There are many different aspects to it that make it very difficult. But I think, our schools don't have the difficulty in terms of that has been mentioned in terms of distance, traveling. But that's not to say there have not been difficulties, hassles, be it roadblocks, be it their own connectivity. So the strange thing has been that despite all of that, the results in their Cambridge exams that was sat in November last year have, for the most part, been better than in previous years. So while the factors that have been mentioned, I believe, are significant, I don't believe those are the real issues that are behind the downfall of education, if it is seen in that light.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming through. Now I'm coming to you, Senator Coltart. What is the government policy really around education, especially our public education system? Where are we as a government, as a country?
Well, obviously, I must state what we all know. I don't represent government and have not been in government for 7 years. So I cannot speak to the current policy of government. I can just observe what the policy appears to be.
Right.
Prior to doing that, let me make the observation. My view is that 2020 has been a catastrophic year for education in Zimbabwe for the vast majority of children. As you know, the private schools, the trust schools only educate a tiny percentage of our children. the vast majority of children are dependent on government schools. And this year, last year, 2020, was, I think, even worse than the previous worst year, nearly 2008, only 27 teaching days in 2008. It seems to me that this goes beyond the COVID crisis. The education sector has been cruelly exposed the past in two ways. Firstly, in the of investment in the vast majority of our schools, the complete absence of internet in most schools, and the fact that children themselves, if there was internet at schools, and even if teachers did have the ability to teach using international free medium like classroom, the vast majority of children don't have the necessary smartphone or iPads or laptops to use that. And tragically, in my mind, that's the fundamentals of private schools and the other schools. The private schools have managed to implement some form of online education, whereas the vast majority of children have not had that privilege. But there is a second factor, and that relates to the way in which our teaching profession has been treated pretty much for the last 7 years. Teachers have been vilified. Their teacher union leaders have been abducted and tortured and subjected to spurious criminal charges. The conditions of almost all teachers in government service have dramatically declined since 2013, and they earn a paltry salary, which is hardly enough to even get them to school, never mind care families. And that was cruelly exposed when there was a partial uplifting of the lockdown in the third term, when schools reopened, and yet the vast majority of teachers in the government service did not report for work, not because they are not professional, not because they lack commitment to our children, but simply because they are being paid an unviable salary. And so teacher morale is incredibly low now. And what we need to face as a nation is that this is a catastrophe. This is arguably the worst state that our education system has been in 60 years. Even if COVID regulations were lifted tomorrow, the fact is that the vast majority of our schools in the government sector not function tomorrow. And it is exacerbated by one policy implemented by government, and that is this refusal to engage in honest, transparent negotiations with our teacher unions, with teachers, and to treat them almost as an enemy. That policy has to change. Before I close, let me make one other observation regarding the state of education, and it relates to the curriculum. We all understood the need for curriculum review and change. The tragedy is that the manner in which the new curriculum has been implemented was deeply flawed. There was inadequate consultation, and there was very little provision made for the production of educational materials to complement that new curriculum. And so even if COVID were lifted, even if we got teachers back into schools, we have this fundamental flaw in the education system at present, where there's a lot of confusion around the curriculum. And we get out of this hole easily. The damage done just by COVID, let's focus on COVID for a moment as I close. We've had a whole segment of our children who effectively had no education last. And of course, you can't stop the flow of children. We've got the grade ones all starting this year, and yet the grades of last year had no education. We don't have any plan for that. You've only got the same, you've got a finite number of teachers, and yet you've got a double number of children coming. It seems to be absolute. So this is a grave crisis that isn't going to be resolved by a political party, one union. This is a national crisis that is going to require all education to get together. The private sector, we're going to have all the trust schools and others. We're going to have to do educationalists and major institutions like the Global Partnership for Education to make are going to address this crime.
Thank you so much, Senator Coltart. I think you raised a lot of issues there. The issue of lack of investment in our education system, the failure for the majority of the people to access internet, and the fact that teacher morality is low. You say it's a national crisis that is going to need everyone to come on board. Tafadzwa, if you're able to come through now, please go ahead. You have muted yourself, Tafadzwa. Tafadzwa, you placed yourself on mute.
Tafadzwa, unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Tafadzwa, please unmute yourself. There you are.
Are you able to hear me clearly now?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. So I think there are primary issues and secondary issues that cause the collapsing of our education system, and our government can never be able to address the secondary issues unless if it first tackles the primary issues. So the first primary issue is that our government does not prioritize our teachers. Every time when our teachers strike, instead of trying to reach an agreement with the teachers, the government bashes our teachers. So our government has to prioritize our teachers, and our government has to unite with all unions, because teachers' unions represent teachers, and it also saves time because as a union, they come up with one thing and they represent all teachers. Unless if our government is saying they can reach out to each and every teacher and ask about their concerns. So basically, teachers' unions are to save everyone's time, including the government, students, and the teachers. The other thing that's causing the collapsing of our education system is our economic crisis. There are no jobs, so that itself is very demotivating, because you cannot motivate a child to go when they are seeing people who have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, who have PhDs in the streets every day suffering. So our government should also address this economic crisis. The other thing that's causing our education system to collapse is that our government does not invest in our education system at all. For example, recently our government invested in the Nyaminyami statue. Instead of investing in Nyaminyami statue, our government should have used that money to invest in our education system, and that could have have gone a long way. Also, the other thing is students from urban areas and students from rural areas should unite because there is no equality at all. There is no fair distribution of opportunities and resources between children from rural areas and children from urban areas. So we should all stand up for children from urban areas because that alone is gonna affect us in the long run. Children from the rural areas do not get what they deserve, it will affect us directly in the long run because they're gonna end up very bitter, and that itself is gonna increase crime rates in the country in the long run. Are you able to hear me clearly?
We can hear you.
So I think this whole COVID-19 situation was actually an advantage because it reflected on how our education system is very outdated. I mean, we were in 2020, 4 years of independence, and we were in the So I think COVID-19 itself was an advantage because it reflected how our education system is very outdated. I mean, we were in 2020, 40 years after independence, 21st century, and forced by lockdown to e-learning. So I think we need a new Minister of Education who is very vibrant and who can easily catch up with the systems. Because last year when the lockdown started in March, and a lot of students started doing their online lessons around August, which is a lot of time that got wasted there. The other issue that our government should also the other issue that our government should also address is to stop abducting, torturing everyone who tries to protest or everyone who tries to speak up. It is our right to education, but our government is making it seem as if education is now a privilege. So personally, I would call all students to protest, all students to stand up, and all students to start speaking up, even for those who are in the rural areas. So just because you're not affected right now by this whole system, which is collapsing, it does not mean it's never going to affect you, because justice denied anywhere is justice denied everywhere. So we have to unite with our parents, teachers, and students from the rural areas and stand up together and protest peacefully because our government is neglecting us. Our government has a lot of money, but it's investing in that really do not matter. Imagine the money that our president uses for his private jet. Imagine if you just use an inexpensive mode of transport and then invest that money in our education system. That would go a long way and we will really appreciate it. So the other thing is really causing our education system to collapse is that our government is instilling fear in young students. And how is our government doing that? When we are writing exams, ZIMSEC examinations, we are not allowed to write about something that is against government. And if you write in this against our government, you're told that you will fail. So they are doing that. So they are doing that and way to instill fear in kids. And as we grow older, we start seeing that as something that is normal. But what is normal? What is normal is a government which allows everyone to fully express themselves. Because if we are all expressing ourselves, then it creates room for growth and improvement.
All right, Tafadzwa, thank you. Wow, you said quite a lot of things. Maybe in summary, you mentioned the issue of misplaced priority by government. You also mentioned the stifling of debate and critical thinking for our children who grow up to be, docile adults. You spoke about an outdated curricula. I think I'll ask our teachers to come through on that one, outdated curricula. You also spoke of increased inequalities between our urban and our rural students. What a loaded presentation there. We want to come to the point, President Masaraure, which is a point that has been raised by Senator Coltart, the issue of lack of prioritizing of teachers. Tafadzwa also raised that issue. So there is a lack of a social contract there between teachers and government that's contributing to where we are today. Now, we're 30 minutes into our discussion. I think the scope of the problem we have been able to identify. Now we want to move on to say, then what? What should we do? What should be done? Well, we understand that teachers in private schools, some are paid handsomely, some they are still there, and some just because they're in private schools they can't really voice out their concerns if they are being underpaid. We'll deal with that aspect also. But Mr. President, how do we move forward? What changes do we need to see, to begin to see now, structurally, in order for us to have a better education system in our country?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yvonne. In the immediate, before I go to the structural intervention, in the immediate, according to UNESCO in June 2020 report, if learners are going to take long at home, they might not return to school forever. So this is the immediate challenge we have to deal with at the moment. And we urge government to do the following so that schools are urgently opened. One, government should move in to test teachers, vaccinate them. All the willing teachers should get vaccinated. Secondly, provide personal protective equipment, ensure that there is safety in our schools. Thirdly, restore the value of teachers as the salary was at around USD 540, 520 for the minimum. Let's pay that salary and then get our teachers motivated. Then the fourth, let's also institute a counseling regime for our learners to get them up to speed, to be in learning mode because they've been away from the classroom for a very long time. Lastly, let's come up with an urgent grade transition plan. How is the learner who was supposed to be in Form 3 or Grade 3 transit to Form 4 or Grade 4? We should have a plan in place, and that plan should find ways of bridging the gap of that gap of access which existed then. But at a more structural level, for long-term solutions, I think the issue of teacher salaries, which was raised earlier on, is not just about the salaries. It is also about how the teachers are allowed to negotiate or engage government for salary reviews. If you read Section 65 of our Constitution, you would smile because Section 65 of our Constitution is like a paragon of virtue. What any worker would want to see in their lives. Section 65 prescribes that everyone has a right to a decent wage, prescribes that everyone has a right to strike, everyone has the right to engage in a job action, everyone has the right to engage in collective bargaining. But those particular provisions, those rights are now mutilated by the ancillary laws. The laws such as the Public Service Act, the Statutory Instrument 141 of 1997. These particular acts gives government powers to still fix salaries alone without engaging in collective bargaining. So you realize that when teachers and other civil servants are engaging in government for salary reviews, it is more of begging, because there's no provision for bargaining. So at the end of the day, we don't produce collective bargaining agreements. So what that means is the teachers will never walk back to the classroom after a particular negotiating process. We have seen in other sectors, workers in the private sector, you see them working on a daily basis, being guided by a collective bargaining agreement. Even if they are underpaid, they're still bound to work because there's a collective bargaining agreement. It's a simple issue that can be addressed by a government through aligning our laws, our ancillary laws to the constitution. That can be done. But also we have to address the administrative conduct. So then we can be fine. So at the end of the day, we hear government complaining that they don't have money, they're raising some other issues, but we are also aware that they are looting. We are aware that 3 billion of our national resources are being lost annually through some shady deals. But we want a transparent system of governance where citizens can speak to their government freely and get feedback. Then we move forward as a collective. We are partners for the development of our education sector. We are not enemies to education. We actually drive sector. We want to make it tick, we make it move. Unfortunately, the government views us as an enemy. But then also, secondly, we are looking at the issue of funding that was raised earlier on again by Senator Coltart. The underfunding of education really, everything was fine before the ISAP intervention of the 90s. After ISAP, this is where we see the sprouting of unregulated private schools, mostly in urban centers. Why? Because the government was now underfunding education. But now, under the government of Emerson Mnangagwa, we now have the austerity measures being instituted. We now have a government which celebrates a budgetary surplus at a time when they're not investing in public services. So for education, we've been consistently receiving a budgetary allocation of around 13%, at a time when the sub-Saharan average is around 16%, at a time where the Dakar Declaration makes it mandatory for the threshold to be around 20% of the budget. What that means is when we underfund the education, we don't have the right infrastructure, we don't have, so we just have to invest in our education. We can't be reaping where we never sowed. So we call upon the government to put more resources to education. What they allocating, over 80% of it goes simply to wages. There's nothing for capital investment. There's really nothing. Then we are also looking at the issue of technological development and bridging the infrastructure deficits. And we have said, let's introduce an education equalization fund. Ziramasanga said it himself. Let's have that fund attending to the inequality gap. Let's have that fund attending to the infrastructure deficits, the connectivity deficits in our rural schools. That is mandatory. We also have the issue of the curriculum deficits, which has to be addressed, the teacher capacity development, which has to be addressed. Our teachers still have to be retrained. I appreciate it. There was a time where there was a fund for the training of teachers. It was obviously mobilized. Such resources were mobilized under the transition fund that was mobilized by Senator Coltart. We have to be investing in also teacher development. Let's also try to speak to the issue of democratization and decentralization of education planning. We want to see the toxic ZANU-PF politics spilling into our schools, learners being dragged to political rallies. We see teachers being tortured. We see teachers being abused for simply speaking against the ruinous policies that are being instituted by our misguided government. That has to stop. We have to open up the space. Let's allow communities to participate. The parents are paying more for the education at times than government itself. Government is underinvesting in this. We are relying, more of our funds are coming from the parent communities. Why do we have to stop these communities? Why do we have to bar these communities from participating in decision making? So I think this is part of a package that we have called ADAPT, which in short speaks to adequate funding for education, democratization and decentralization of education management, addressing curriculum deficits and teacher development, promoting labor justice within the education sector, and then technological and infrastructure development in rural schools. Thanks, Yvonne.
All right, President Masaraure, you raised fundamental issues there. And I think we all agree that if we are to implement a quarter of what you've just said, we may actually start making inroads in our education sector. Now I'm going to come to you, Tim, and some of these challenges that are raised by President Masaraure have seen the sprouting of private schools in our country. Could this increase in private school a reflection of the lack of faith that most parents or middle income earner parents have in our public education system?
I think it reflects that very much. There has been a lack of confidence maybe in the government sector. It's interesting that while many of the private schools have started up as businesses, as profit-making businesses, rather than educational institutions, the ministry themselves are saying they are welcoming private investment. They want individuals to start schools. The difficulty there is that while we may become independent, we are not actually independent. We are independent in the sense that we don't get any financial assistance from government whatsoever for teachers, pupils, or facilities. But we are not independent in terms of how we run the schools, how we will conduct ourselves. There's still that control, and therefore we are still not able to do that. And in effect as well, the difficulty is that with the increase of independent schools, private schools, however you call them, while that may be welcomed, they are generally recruiting teachers, the better teachers, if you like, probably, from the government sector. So in fact, we're not actually helping the whole government system. It's a catch-22. It's a cycle that just goes on. So I think there is the difficulty. For me, it's the education needs to be seen as an essential service. And while the medical profession is an essential service, they are dealing with the physical health, but schools are dealing with the mental health, the social health, the intellectual health, as well as the physical health of the children. And they are the ones who are suffering at the moment by not being at school, not purely on the side of intellectual and the academic, but on many, many other areas where there is a real need. So I think for me, it's not just a financial situation that needs to be overcome. That is a massive one. That is not going to be solved quickly. And that is not on itself going to solve the crisis of poor performances, results going down. It is the immediate one, and there will be no quick fix to that because there's no money around. But we do have to find ways. But again, for me, much of the impact, and we haven't really discussed it at all, is on the whole educational side. We've hinted at the curriculum. There's a huge area there that we're looking at the wrong areas. We're doing the wrong things. And as was spoken about, we are 21st century youngsters are supposed to come out with critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, character. And yet that is in our new curriculum. But anyone who shows critical thinking is slammed, is criticized, is silenced, or whatever. So do we want it or don't we want it? The children of today are different, are wired differently from when I was at school, when you were at school. And therefore, we're still trying to run our schools the way we did in the 20th century, and maybe in some cases the 19th century. So there are many issues I do believe that we need to address, not just the financial one, but that obviously at the moment is the major one.
That's really amazing. You know, when we look at the early 1980s, there was an agreement between parents and the educational system was just a collaborative effort. And in order to address the inequalities that existed prior to independence, the government had to involve communities, and we don't see that happening now, and we seem to be going backwards. Now, I want to come to you, Senator Coltart, and ask this question. What is it that you did differently between 2009 and 2013 that saw an improvement in our education sector? Sorry, may I mute you?
So I didn't come to the job thinking that I knew it all. In fact, I was keenly aware of my own deficiencies. In essence, what I did was I drew on the best brains in the country. I re-established the National Education Advisory Board. I brought on key education from both the private and public sector. I brought on all the then presidents of the teacher trade unions to that body. I brought in people from the private sector, people like Marion Lovu, arguably one of our best educationists ever. And of course, I brought on people from the Association of Trust Schools. And I listened to them. Before I implemented any policies, I made sure that we had a broad consensus because we had a crisis then, and I believe that we're in a similar, if not worse, situation now.
Yeah.
So rocket science in this is a matter of listening to the authorities, by authorities, I mean people with real education experience, who know what they're talking about, and to hear what the broad consensus is. We are blessed in this country with an amazing teaching profession and amazing educationists right across this nation. The trouble is that we just don't listen to them sufficiently. The other thing that I did was obviously I established a bridge between the education ministry and the finance ministry. I took trade union leaders in to see then Minister of Finance, Tendai Biti, so that he could stand their plight and that he could explain to them the financial difficulties being faced by the nation. As you may recall, everyone in early 2009 went on to a salary of $100 US. That included me. It was the only way that we could get teachers back in the classroom by showing that we were all tightening the belts. And it's a fundamental problem here today in that teachers are being asked to survive on less than $100 US, and yet clearly the ruling elite are plundering more than they have ever done before. And so there's no unanimity, there's no sense of national peace. And then finally, obviously there were plenty of things done, but let me focus on the main ones. I reached out to the international community. I established a good core with UNICEF in particular, with the director of UNICEF, and we worked out what the problems were and what the international community could do to resolve that. And that could only be done on the basis of transparency. So I hope you realize that in my policies, there was no rocket science. I didn't approach it as an educationalist, but more as someone who wanted a practical solutions to a problem. And we can do that again. The one thing I found in my interaction with the international community is that you're pushing against an open door because people love children the world over. People understand the importance of education the world over. You just have to provide them with a credible plan and confidence that their money is actually going to go to children and teachers. And then you will find that checkbooks open right across the world. But where governments and international institutions believe that there's corruption a lack of transparency, they'll keep their checkbooks closed. And that's one of the problems that we have. Just one final point. Tragically, and this is not a problem that just affects Zimbabwe, it's a problem which affects virtually every government in the world. Most politicians do not understand the importance of education. I fall into that category. I've been a lawyer my entire life, and I had a good education at secondary level and tertiary level, but I took it for granted. I didn't understand the importance of education until I became minister, and I understood the complexities of it and the consequences when you don't invest sufficiently in education and in the teaching profession. That is a message that we have to convey on the international stage. One of my pet topics is the between the amount of money the international community spends on nuclear weapons compared to education. But that also applies domestically. When we see how much money is allocated to defense and the size of the cabinet and cabinet perks, one of our participants today said that, you know, just one flight to Dubai of an aircraft can pay for hundreds of thousands of textbooks. That's the reality. But you have to persuade the cabinet that this sector needs priority. One other problem in this regard is that politicians the world over like instant gratification, instant results. And one of the problems with education is that you don't see the immediate benefit of investing in education in one term of a politician's life. It takes decades to invest. And so you have to take this beyond a partisan debate to engender in a cabinet and in a nation that this needs to be a national program that transcends partisanship, transcends the life of one parliament. You know, the best example of this is the country of Finland. Finland has a very small economy in world, yes. In the context of world economies. After the Second World War, it had a very small economy, very little to invest in education. It had a relatively poor education system. But the Finnish and its politicians right across the board decided that they would invest in education, and they started in the 1950s, and they have continually invested over some 50 years, and now it is one of the top 10 has one of the top 10 education systems in the world. That's what we've got to convince not just ZANU-PF MPs and leaders, but MDC and politicians right across the board, that this needs to be a national project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Coltart. Our solutions are in sight and they are within us, but I don't know where we are failing to recognize that we should be doing this for our own country. I want to come to you, Mr. Masengwe. I want to come to you. How are you going to bridge the gap that has been created in the learning environment for the students, especially those who couldn't access education during this COVID-19 period? As rural teachers, how are you? What strategies do you have in place to make sure that our kids are up to speed with what is happening?
Can you come again?
Okay, I'm saying, what strategies do you have as rural teachers to make sure that your students are up to speed with the curriculum? Murukundinzo, are you hearing me? Mr. Masengwe, can you hear me?
Yeah, on strategies I had, but last sentence there.
Okay, now what strategies do you have in place for
Correct.
children?
You are saying what are the strategies?
Yes, I'm asking for strategies that you have in place in order to make sure that the kids who missed out on their learning in 2020 are up to speed with the curricula in 2021. What strategies do you have in place for that?
Okay, we are talking about the strategies, the way forward that we can do as teachers in rural area. On what best can we
Yes.
do to learners who missed learning from March up to now? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
sir.
As teachers, we agreed that what is important is to make sure that our future leaders, maybe, or our future students must get learning. For example, in our case, I'm doing what we call group online lessons on WhatsApp that I'm helping some of the students. But generally, we are asking the government or even those who wish to provide help to us as rural teachers to provide us with the basics like internet. Things are moving, and we don't run out from all this. That learning is now being done even on Google. One thing that is in place, one that we can do so far is to make sure that our learners must get. We must revisit some of the topics that was not being done well due to COVID. But I don't think if it is proper for us to, because our situation so far as it is not allowing us to move on, because we do not have, as it was noted earlier, we do not have PPEs, sanitizers, even a water supply that is consistent. I don't know. These are some of the challenges that we are facing. In place so far, I think we can provide online lessons using WhatsApp, but the issue of data is still remains a challenge. And also, once we get back, we try by all means to revisit some of the topics that didn't finish well. I think I'm done concerning the strategies.
Thank you so much, Mr. Masengwe. We really appreciate. We really appreciate the efforts that you're putting up in our rural schools. It's not easy, but we know we'll definitely get there. Now, just to round off, Tafadzwa, if you can hear me. Tafadzwa, can you hear me? I've sent you your question. I cannot unmute you because you've muted yourself. If you can just unmute yourself and give us a parting shot. All right, I think we've lost Tafadzwa there. We just want to round up this. We just want to round out this discussion. If anyone has got something else that they want to add on to the discussion that we have, just to round off. Tafadzwa, are you there? All right, team, over to you. You muted yourself, so please unmute yourself first.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm not a politician. I'm an educationist, and in some ways, what has come out already today has been that it seems that we are on opposing sides. We need to be together and be looking at this not for political gain, but for the benefit of the children. And in that regard, it will be for the benefit of the country. And as Senator Coltart said, it will take time. But, it might be of value for us to remind ourselves that if we are critical of politicians, they went to school once. And we are therefore, we didn't train them well, if you know, and we are the guilty ones in that regard. But for me, there's the side of it where there's a very valuable exercise in terms of what makes a quality school, and they have 14 qualities of that make them up. And I believe if we followed those, had those same 14 qualities for our education system, if they produce a quality school, they will produce a quality education. And a lot of that surrounds, it involves clear accountability. Of all the 14 points that are made, the qualities that are needed for a quality school, not one of them costs a cent.
May you round them down, Tim? Are you able to round down the 14 qualities that
I can read them out very quickly. Strong leadership, clear accountability, strong parental support, continuous professional development, long-term planning, interaction with other education schools or systems, sound principles, ethical governance, integrity, relevance, a distinctive mission, commitment to service, not to success or to finance, attention to detail, and dedicated staff. Well, at the moment, we got demotivated staff. We've got, but yeah, I would say that if we focus on those things and try to make sure we get those right, our education system as a whole will be well. So if our staff aren't dedicated, and it's understandable because they are trying to simply to survive, then we need to try to develop that. I believe in this country, beyond, the teachers have shown extraordinary dedication, in particular through this COVID, in being willing to continue to educate the children at huge personal sacrifice, be it financial, emotional, temporal. And so, yes, we have got to, I would reiterate, we need to, all sectors of education need to come together. Let's talk about it as an education. It's an essential service. It's a right, and that makes it essential. And there are plenty of willing participants in all sectors who want to make it work. And I believe who, when they come together for the greater good of the country, through the greater good of the children, we will achieve that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much indeed. If we all come together, we will definitely do something for our children. Senator Coltart, over to you, sir.
I presume that these are our parting comments.
Yes,
and I just want to go back to the original theme of this, what went wrong.
All right, we lost him there. Tafadzwa, you can come through.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, I can hear you. Senator Coltart will come back to you.
Hello, I'm not sure that anyone.
Tafadzwa, we can hear you. You can go ahead. Senator Coltart will come back to you in a minute.
Oh, all right, thank you. So as we all know that our government is never willing to invest in things that I think our government should at least try to buy all kids in the rural areas textbooks, because most kids in urban areas are doing online lessons at the moment. But because they do not, but because the kids in rural areas do not have facilities which can help them to do e-learning, they're just sitting at home. So our government should at least buy the textbooks whilst they are preparing and sanitizing schools, whilst preparing to open those schools. So our government should at least try to buy those few children textbooks. Our government should at least try to do something, because honestly, it's frustrating. It is us back as
All right. Thank you, Tafadzwa. Thank you so much. Back to you, Senator David Coltart.
So
What went wrong? Over to you, Senator Coltart.
Hi, I'm presuming that you can hear me before I speak. Can you confirm that?
Yes, I can hear you, Senator.
So just briefly, in terms of closing remarks, let me reiterate what I believe needs to be done. The first thing is that we need to acknowledge that there is a crisis, and a very grave crisis that is not going to be resolved overnight. The loss of a year's education system for one child is a catastrophe, but when it applies to literally hundreds of thousands of children right across our nation, it is the consequences for our nation going forward won't be felt this week or next month, but they'll be felt in the years to come. One of the indicators is, of course, the grade 7 results, and we'll see what happens with the O-level and A-level results. Whilst the Cambridge results may have been good in the private schools, I fear that we will see a decline in educational standards and a progressive decline. And let me reiterate, this is not going to be resolved by one minister or one political party. It is only going to be resolved if there's a national effort and honesty and transparency. And there needs to be dialogue involving the teacher unions. This war with the unions has to end. And the government must listen to the teachers. The immediate need in the coming weeks and months is to get our schools reopened. And that is going to take a short-term investment to address the legitimate concerns of teachers regarding PPE and other measures needed to get schools open. But that needs to happen. We simply cannot afford to have another lost year of education. And so this needs to be a national priority. In fact, after actually dealing with the health issues of COVID, education needs to be the second priority of government. We simply have to get our children back into schools. Aside from the decline in their education, the psychological consequences for these children, I'm appalled as I drive around Zimbabwe to see young children on the streets and what influences they are now subjected to horrifies me. And so in the coming weeks, I hope that the teacher unions will reach out to government and that the current minister will have the patriotism and grace to listen and to enter into a dialogue with them.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Coltart, for the parting words. I'm going to give you, President Masaraure, an opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. I have to admit that I learned a lot today from Tim, Dave, and also Tafadzwa, Zingai. It was a great learning experience. One thing for me which really stands out is that we need each other. Education sector needs our collective action as a people. Government cannot go it alone. Parents can't go it alone. Teachers can't go it alone. We just need all stakeholders on the table, agree on a collective way forward and save our sector. It is not about who is in power, who is out of power. It is about the collective interest of our people. The agents of now is to convene in all education stakeholders engagement and ensure that we iron out whatever differences we have and we get our kids back in school and ensure we deliver the best of education for people. And thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated.
Awesome. Thank you so much, President Masaraure, for those words. The cost the biggest lesson that I've learned from this conversation is that the cost of correcting is less than the cost of repairing. It is easy to mend children than to repair men. So we all have a responsibility and an obligation to make sure that our education sector, just as every other sector, begins to function well in order for our nation to function well. Thank you so much for joining us on Zimbabwe Daily as we brought to you Friend Talk with Yvonne, a program where we look at every policy issue that is happening. We look at current affairs issues. We look at everything that affects our society. We bring the leaders onto the show so that we talk about it and bring finality to the issues. I hope you've been blessed. I hope you have learned one or two things. And I hope as we go forward, we are all going to hold on together and make Zimbabwe work again. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Yvonne Muchaka. Thank you so much to my guests on the show today. May the good Lord bless all of you. Thank you so much.